Can a religion be proven true just because its holy book contains statements that appear to match modern science? In this debate, Matt Dillahunty takes on one of the most common arguments for Islam and asks a question many apologists struggle to answer. How do scientifically accurate statements prove that Allah exists or that Muhammad was God's prophet? Watch as the conversation moves beyond impressive claims and into the much harder question of what actually counts as evidence for truth. Let's get into it.
Let me see if I can explain this. A tenet of Islam is not pointing to a scientific claim about the world. A tenet of Islam is something about the religion of Islam. This is why I brought up the kissing Hank's ass list, because it has things on it that are true, but that doesn't mean that other things are true. And if we're going to say, is Islam true? If the only thing that you can present is that you find it remarkable that somebody got some things about science right, which I'm not even necessarily completely convinced that that's the case for a lot of these, cool. But that has nothing to do with whether or not Allah is real. It has nothing to do with whether or not Muhammad was a prophet of Allah. It has nothing to do with whether or not Muhammad was the last prophet. It has nothing to do with the purpose of life. It has nothing to do with prayers. None of that. If I showed up, and by the way, atheism isn't a religion. You don't have to compare it to other religions. And you don't have to pick a religion. That's what atheism is basically saying. It's saying, I agree with all of your religions, that all of the other ones are wrong. It's just that I also include yours as not viable either. That's the way this works. If you're going to claim that something is true, you have to demonstrate that it's true. Not that it has said, or that the book based that it's derived from has said some things that are true that are also said elsewhere. Scientific findings are not tenets of Islam. If all you can ever demonstrate is that the Quran got some stuff right about science and that some people are happier as Muslims, congratulations, you've demonstrated absolutely nothing that Islam is true, that it might be beneficial, that it might have useful information, that you might have demonstrated, but not that it is true. And the subject of the debate tonight is not, did some guy say these scientific things? The subject of the debate tonight is Islam true? And maybe the reason you thought I wouldn't show up to debate it is because you didn't show up to debate it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, up to this point, what I was doing, I was establishing evidence. You see, to answer that question, is Islam true? We got to present evidence. And, you want to say, well, how do we know this thing is really true? Well, you have many different belief systems. You have Christianity, you have atheism, you have Islam. And the way to answer this question is to examine what evidences are provided by each of these belief systems. So I actually looked at the evidences for Islam, and I found it to be the most compelling. And so the point here is, through human reason, we can arrive at why Islam is the true religion. And the evidence, which is irrefutable, is this man. If we think about him, Prophet Muhammad, he started a scientific revolution which has benefited and helped all of humanity, which I showed you in my opening presentation. All of Western Europe's science, mathematics, and have all benefited from the revolutionary libraries of Islam. That was one of the quotations I was going to share with you, but doesn't matter now. And then we see that this so-called person in the desert, if he was a liar, if he was a charlatan, how do you explain him being able to do all of this? We also showed that it is a powerful rehabilitating force in the prisons. Millions of people it has bettered their life, made them better human beings. And this is something consistent with what we know a loving, compassionate God would do. Okay, so it's consistent with that. Okay, and then we see that Islam brings great happiness in people's life based on the study which I showed you, this feeling of oneness. Which we talked about. And so when you start adding up all these things, it starts pointing, hey, there's something different about Islam, which atheism has no evidence for. Christianity, of course, they're gone because they're not here debating these topics because of all the errors in their book, all the scientific contradictions in their book. And we're going to get to that in just a second, by the way, because I will extend my challenge for you to show me something scientifically incorrect in the Quran, like you did in your debate with Kenny.
Time. With that, we'll kick it over to Matt.
So you started by saying that we have to present evidence. I'd love for you to present evidence. And then you followed up saying that we have to present evidence by saying what we have to do is compare evidences for each. No, sir, that's not how we determine truth. And then you followed it up by saying that you found Islam most compelling. Well, that's not how we find truth either. So you started by getting it right, by saying you need to present evidence. But then instead of presenting any evidence, you said that we need to compare the evidences for a variety of religions and that you found Islam the most compelling. Well, that's like saying that you found someone to be the prettiest person at the ugly competition. It doesn't tell you whether or not they're pretty. The fact that they're the prettiest at the ugly competition is what you found. What you find most compelling is completely irrelevant to whether or not it's true. And your repeated refrain, which you've now said expressly as, how do you explain it, is an argument from ignorance fallacy. It is an implicit assertion that your truth stands until somebody can debunk it, which is absolutely 100% undeniably fallacious. The suggestion that something is true until it's proven wrong is a fallacy. I would hope that you would at least recognize that. But when you run around saying, I want you to show me something that's wrong in the Quran, well, it doesn't make any difference whether I could or whether anybody else could, because even if there's nothing in there that somebody can identify as scientifically wrong, what we're talking about is it testable? Is it falsifiable? And have you demonstrated the truth of any of the tenets? And the answer to all of those seems to be no.
You got it. Thank you very much. And folks, I want to remind you, if you haven't yet, hit that like button. We really do appreciate that support. And with that, Nadir, the floor is all yours.
Yeah, so I think what Matt is trying to do, he's trying to turn this into a debate about evidence. How do we weigh evidence? And I guess we could sort of talk about that, but I think we need to look at the big elephant in the room. What's really going on here? And I told you this what were my first statements in this debate? That the atheists are going to run away from the science of the Quran. And I mentioned that very clearly in the beginning. And look at this, what we see here tonight. He's backing away. Look, in his debate with Kenny, he was saying the Quran contradicts science here. It talks about pairs. It talks about flat earth. And I don't see any of that tonight, and so he wants to back away. But anyway, my challenge is out there to extend you, because this is the falsibility test, which I'm giving it to you. Show me where you claim that the Quran contradicts modern science, and you will never find that. You said basically something is true until proven wrong. I'm not arguing that. I'm not saying, I've never argued that. You are attacking a straw man at this point. The logic here about why we say Islam is true, because we look at this one man, Prophet Muhammad, is consistently bringing to us scientifically correct statements. We talked about talking ants, that they warn people. We talked about 3 scientifically correct statements about seas, 2 about alcohol, and then my time is up and I didn't have any more. But then that's just the short list here. So we're like, wait a second, how is a human being consistently giving us scientifically correct statements? That's not possible. We can call the cops. We can say this could be a coincidence. It could be observed. It could, maybe he plagiarized, copying it from somewhere else. But cops can't explain the amount of scientifically correct statements in the Quran, and we find Islam and things so astonishing, like the preventive cure for COVID and AIDS and Ebola. So based on the bulk of evidence which we are seeing here, it is reasonable to assume this is the result of God.
Yeah, so first of all, the second you say something like it's reasonable to assume, you don't understand what reason is. And yes, I do want to make this a debate about evidence, because I think that's what debates should be. If you're going to say something is true, you should be presenting the evidence for it. So yes, I'm going to make this a debate about evidence. I'm not running away from the science of it. It's just that I pointed out what is and isn't relevant to the truth of whether or not Islam is true. The fact that you keep pointing to things that are scientifically consistent from your perspective is irrelevant to whether or not the foundational tenets of Islam are true. I don't know how many times I can just repeat that. But you seem to be upset that I didn't do the exact same opening statement that I did for Kenny. Now, I explained at the beginning why I did that, because I think that would be incredibly lazy of me to just come in and say the same things. But it's the exact same subject. Literally, is Islam true? This is the same subject. If you want to bring up something so desperately that you think I said, why didn't you do it? And why didn't you counter any of those things in your opening statement? Were you sitting here trying to set a trap? Some of us are able to focus on a number of different things at once. And so when I decided, hey, I'm going to debate this exact same subject again, there's no reason for me to repeat what I've already said. I'm not a religious apologist. I don't have to come in and say the same shit week after week after week after week. I can address other things, because my job here, my goal here, is to educate people about fallacies, like the argument from ignorance, about appeals to authority, about you're repeatedly saying, oh, here's somebody who told us a bunch of stuff. How do you explain that? Well, the issue here is not, do you have an alternate explanation for it's because God told him? The issue is, can you show that God told him? And you can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he wants to turn this into a debate about evidence. And I've already pointed out, like I said, he is, and I'm telling it to you to your face, not, I'm sorry, am I talking or who's talking? I think he's,
it's your turn. It's your turn.
I'm not talking.
Oh, okay.
I just nodded.
Matt thinks he's talking.
I just nodded. I didn't say a word.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I got confused. Never mind. All right. So,
Hank.
see, I've already said that the scientific evidence of the Quran is unchallengeable and it's undeniable. Yes, there is something very significant about the Quran and science. Many people have tried to make claims, oh, but the Quran contradicts science. Sperm comes from the backbone and the ribs, and they bring up all of these fallacious arguments, but they're also watching the debates and they're watching these arguments getting destroyed one by one. So now, and I called it out from the very beginning, at the very start of this discussion. I was very surprised he would even show up tonight to challenge the scientific miracles of the Quran, because the atheists and all these people are now watching these debates. And they're seeing, oh my God, there is validity to the scientific miracle narrative here. So I'm going to leave that alone. It looks like that is a case which is closed now. I think, the case has been made on that. So now, and you're right, I didn't address a lot of the things in your 10 minutes because I was moving in for the kill. To use the science of the Quran to basically prove that there is something supernatural. Now, you did say something, right? Well, I can't really prove it's a God, but what we can prove, Matt, is there is something supernatural, because a mere human being in the desert cannot be the author of so many scientifically correct statements and then turn around and have this power to rehabilitate millions of prisoners in the prison system and making them better human beings, as the research showed, and to bring happiness and good in our life based on the study which I presented to you. Like, wait a second, how is one guy doing all this? And so when we say, look, this could be the result of God, is very reasonable.
So you just said that you could prove that there is something supernatural, and you follow that up by saying that you can prove there's something supernatural because a human being cannot get certain scientific things right and inspire people to change their lives. That's just a bald assertion. You haven't demonstrated that that's not possible. I see everything points to the conclusion that it is possible, and the fact that you're denying other religions doing the same thing, then that demonstrates that it's actually possible. And once again, you've expressed surprise that I even bothered to show up, which I find absurd, but I'm glad one of us did.
Mm-hmm. Well, I actually agree with what you're saying. You said basically many people changing, other religions can make the same claim that many people, they look at, we rehabilitated people. That doesn't prove it to be from God. I do accept that argument. That's absolutely valid. I've said that from the very beginning. If we look at these individual occurrences, you can call the cops, which is what you're doing. You're calling the cops and say, well, you can be explained. Yeah, of course it can. The miracle is not in the individual occurrence. The miracle is in the quantity and the quality. What do I mean by quality? Quality meaning, if you look at the scientific arguments, I was not, playing with a verse, interpreting it into there. And so when you actually look at the Quran, it doesn't say that I'm reading science into the Quran or doing any of that kind of monkey business that you see other people doing. So it's the quality. It is word for word agreement with modern science, and it's undeniable. So that's where the scientific miracle is. Now, you said that, but I want to get back to your point. Okay, well, other religions can do this as well, where they rehabilitate prisoners. Oh, that's true. And that's all the more reason why I'm not an atheist, because there is something out there that's doing this. You see, so that's actually kind of a death blow for your belief system. And so, now, of course, that fact alone will not point to Islam. That's true. But when you start adding it all together, he also triggered Muhammad triggered a scientific revolution called the Golden Age of Islam, which benefited all of humanity. Like, okay, wait a second. You're doing all this? This is why we say the Quran is a scientific miracle. It's not just one or two occurrences, which you can call the cops. The miracle is in the quantity of it and the quality of it. And so the point which I'm trying to raise to you, when you see this miracle right before your very own eyes, which is in the quantity and the quality, not the individual occurrence, Matt, please get that right.
And
so to say this is from God, it's kind of reasonable.
Yeah, don't suggest that I didn't get it right and that I was only talking about a single instance, because ages ago I already said that the plural of anecdote is not data, and that the truth isn't impacted by the number of people believe something, or even the number of claims that they might get right. The number of claims that aren't tied to the foundations of Islam is irrelevant. This is the whole purpose. I'm sorry that you didn't understand this, but the whole purpose of Hank's list is it was a parody that somebody wrote. Not a real this wasn't about a real religion. It's a parody of religion, so that it is ambiguous or agnostic as to whether it's about Islam or Christianity or whatever else, because it's not about any of them. But it is about what you guys do, which is you come in with a list and you say these things are right, therefore these other things are right. Well, the things that you're saying are right have nothing to do with those other things. There could be hundreds of true statements in the Quran, and that doesn't tell you at all whether or not there is a God, whether it's Allah, whether Muhammad was a prophet of Allah, whether Muhammad was the last prophet of Allah, and whether the purpose of life is to worship God. All 5 things that you haven't even begun to even attempt to address at all. And when you say that, you keep knocking atheism, this is the death of your belief system. Well, my belief system with regard to atheism is not a belief system. It's a position on a single issue. To whatever extent I have a belief system, when it comes to epistemology, it's skepticism. When it comes to morality, it's humanism. And if you want to have a debate about which is better for the world, humanism or Islam, I already said at the outset that I would be happy to do that. But tonight's debate is supposed to be, is Islam true? Are you going to defend any of those 5 individual things or anything similar within Islam to show that they are actually true? Or are you just going to keep saying, there's so much here that's remarkable, it must be God, because that is a fallacious argument? I don't know how else to explain logical fallacies to you and your friends, but you guys keep committing them. The way to reach truth is not through a path of how else can you explain this? That's a logical fallacy. Are you going to defend the truth of Islam or not? Because now we're just wasting time.
Mm-hmm. Well, right now you're attacking a straw man. I never argued it, because we see all the miraculous things in the Quran and with Prophet Muhammad, it must be God. I never said that. I said it's a very reasonable conclusion. It's the most smartest conclusion to assume that there is a God. And again, like I said, some of the issues, you're right, I didn't exactly address them because I was too busy, focusing on the science of the Quran. But now I'll do my best to answer the rest of these questions here. I never asked a question, how else can you explain this? The issue, I never said that. I said we can call the cops. That explains 1 or 2 or 3 occurrences, but it can't explain all of it. So we do have something supernatural in Islam. Now, one of your questions, well, how do you know the rest of it is true? So one of the promises made in the Quran is that Allah will actually protect this book, okay? And He'll protect it from corruption, which the other books, is not there. And so one of the falsification tests of that is actually to find scientific contradictions in it. Because I can tell you what, in all the other books, whether it's the Bible, whether it's the Book of Galen, or all the other, you will find scientific contradictions, but you will never find that with the Quran. The Quran is in complete harmony with modern science. And that facts now when we look at that bulk of evidence, that actually matches up with the promise Allah gave us in the Quran that He will protect this book from corruption. So again, we see confirmation of what the Quran is teaching us. So the point which I'm trying to make to you is, when you look at the bulk of evidence, something has to answer for the supernatural quality of the Quran. A mere human being cannot do all of this. He cannot be the author of all of these scientific statements. So we need to now find a good answer for that. So God is very reasonable, and it's really the best answer. Now, you could, of course, say maybe the Martians, aliens, Possibly, but the God one actually does make more sense, and we can go into explain why that makes more sense out of all the supernatural possibilities.
Time.
Sure. So I understand it. You actually did say, I wrote it down as you said it, and somebody can rewind. How do you explain that? You literally did, and then you just denied it a little while ago. Instead of denying stuff, especially if it's at least in the spirit of what you've been saying over and over again, and it's literally what you said that people can rewind to, maybe just suck it up. But when you say that God is the most smartest conclusion to assume, the debate's over. Most smartest is silly already, but conclusion to assume, that's not the way conclusions work. You don't just assume things. This is what you keep doing. You keep assuming that no man could do that. You keep asserting that it's the case, no man could do this, and assuming that it's the case, but you don't ever demonstrate it. You haven't presented any argument or evidence that a single man couldn't write a book that impacted people's lives and included true statements. You can't. And your assertion that this must be supernatural is without cause as well. It's without any justification as well. God doesn't explain anything, and the supernatural isn't something you just get to assert. I mean, you talk about how the Quran will be protected and protected from corruption. Well, the Bible says the same thing, even though we know that that's not true. But I don't care about the Bible because I'm not a Christian. But I will tell you that when it comes to Scientology, for example, they still have the original copies in their founder's handwriting. And so that's one way to protect it from corruption. Is God protecting Scientology from corruption? But the fact whether or not something becomes corrupt or altered or whatever is also not evidence that there is, in fact, a God protecting it. You keep coming up with these things. Ooh, there's a whole bunch of claims here. No human being could do that, therefore God. Ooh, the book is still we still have the original, and we still are true to the original. That just couldn't be the case unless there's a God. You keep making all these assertions that something could not be the case unless there's a God. Well, God is not a candidate explanation until you demonstrate that God is real. Period. It doesn't even get to be when we say, here's a dead body, what is the explanation for this? If you say God did it, then the question is, how do you know there is a God? How do you know that God can do this? And you point to all those things. Could God have killed somebody? If a God exists, certainly a God could kill somebody. But the fact that you have a dead body is evidence of a dead body. It's not evidence that a God did it. So you have to show how and why God is a valid candidate explanation before you get to go running to it's the best explanation, because it doesn't explain anything. It's an attempt to solve a mystery with a mystery.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying it's a mystery now. So basically, I think let me see if I can just very quickly correct you on some of the misunderstandings you have about the Bible. I don't think the Bible says that that this book cannot be corrupted by man. At least I'm not aware of any verse like that. And I never said, look, it's uncorruptible, therefore it's from God. No, my argument was, look, the fact that the Quran is in complete harmony with modern science, that is consistent with the claim and the promise which the Quran made that Allah will protect it. Where we are right now with the Quran is that it is supernatural. That's indisputable based on the scientific evidence. I've presented, and let's say we assign probability to the possibility of getting all this stuff right. The probability of giving us the cure for COVID, Ebola, and the probability of getting the right dosage on the drug of alcohol, which is none, which saved all these children from the curse or from the disease of fetal alcohol syndrome. Let's just say it's 50% of getting all this stuff right. As you can see, I'm being very charitable here. Well, when you do, let's say I gave you 8 scientifically correct statements there. Well, the probability of you getting it right every time is now 1/64, which is very improbable. And I have more scientific evidence. And then you turn around and start a scientific revolution. Then you have this power in you to rehabilitate millions of prisoners, which your atheism doesn't do anything. And then you have the ability to bring this sense of oneness and happiness to people. Muslims are number one among all the different beliefs. So we're like, wait a second. One human being can't be doing all this stuff. Okay, that doesn't make no sense. So now the only option, there is something supernatural. There is something which is causing this to happen. So I cannot prove that it is God who's doing that. Yes, you're right, Matt. But what I can say, that's the most intelligent explanation for the facts. It makes sense, and it's really the best explanation. And when we see things like the cure for COVID and all these things, it's consistent with the God.
There was absolutely nothing new in there that he hasn't repeated 4 or 5 times, and absolutely nothing in there that addresses the truth of the tenets of Islam. I have no comment.
The video ends here, but here's a question that almost never comes up. What would Islam look like if it weren't true? If the answer is, it would still have millions of devoted followers, transform lives, preserve its holy book, and contain passages that appear to agree with modern science, then none of those facts can tell us whether Islam is actually true. They fit both a true religion and a false one. Good evidence doesn't merely support a conclusion, it separates it from its competitors. That's exactly why Matt kept asking for a direct connection between the evidence and the central claims of Islam. There's another issue hiding beneath the surface. Humans have an incredible habit of upgrading remarkable into miraculous. A charismatic leader becomes divinely guided. A civilization's achievements become proof of revelation. A book that survives for centuries suddenly becomes evidence of supernatural protection. But remarkable things happen all the time without requiring supernatural explanations. If influence alone pointed to God, we'd have to ask whether Shakespeare, Einstein, or whoever invented pizza also had a direct line to heaven. Success deserves an explanation, but God did it doesn't automatically win just because something is impressive. Notice something else. Imagine someone hands you a medical textbook and proudly points out 50 statements that modern medicine agrees with. Great, but does that prove every treatment in the book works? Of course not. Each claim has to stand on its own evidence. Religious apologetics often skips that step. It moves from, these passages appear accurate, to, therefore the central theological claims are true. That's a leap, not a bridge. The irony is that skeptics aren't asking Islam to meet a higher standard than everyone else. They're asking it to meet the same standard Muslims already apply to other religions. If a Christian argued that the Bible must be true because it contains accurate historical details and changes lives, most Muslims wouldn't be convinced. They'd want evidence connecting those facts to Christianity's central claims. That's exactly the standard Matt applies here. It's consistent, even when it challenges ideas he might personally dislike or agree with. One last thought. A weak method doesn't become stronger because it reaches a conclusion you already favor. If your way of reasoning could just as easily prove Christianity, Hinduism, Mormonism, or tomorrow's brand new religion founded by a guy claiming his cat receives messages from the universe, then the problem isn't the conclusion, it's the method. Skepticism isn't about saying no, it's about making sure the road to yes is solid enough that it doesn't lead everywhere at once. If you enjoyed this discussion, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more debates like this, and never forget to support the original creator by watching the full debate on their channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.